79% of lithium, 89% of copper, and 97% of nickel, all lie within 35 miles of an Indian reservation. Most likely, that means that a majority of those resources are on a reservation. So the opportunity for tribes, um, through that free, prior, and informed consent under FPIC, for me, the most important is informed. As a tribal leader, as an ex-tribal leader, for my people, the Pit River Tribe of California in far northeastern part of the state, having the having as much information, I think, is really critical and key, and it's something that a lot of tribes don't have. We know our gut tells us there's a lot of resources, but we have no idea. And so the opportunity to prove those numbers, I think, is the big key test. It's a barrier, but I think it's an opportunity to work with our federal partners, USGS, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Department of Interior, but also working with our state geological surveys, as well as industry and national labs to work on collectively and individually, right? Because then those resources lie on a specific reservation, and it's up to those tribes to in a self-determined way, in an informed way, to make that decision to move forward or not. So that's the first facet. Um, but even if we say we have 60 million acres and nothing is underneath it, it's just completely barren, which is not the case. But say that we were, the second opportunity is um, around logistics and the processing of those minerals and the research and development. So if we didn't have any resources, we still are. Many of our reservations are within significant transportation corridors within the BNSF Railroad, Union Pacific here in the West, along the I-80 corridor, northern Nevada, southern Wyoming, um, the Great Northern Corridor, which it goes from Chicago to Seattle primarily through Montana, Minnesota, North Dakota, and Idaho and Washington. There's significant tribes and rail access and major highway, broadband, and all the rest. So to me, there's a secondary opportunity around processing of and the logistics of the mineral extraction, even if we don't have any mineral extraction on our reservation. And the third is around the research and development. As an example, we're our NAMES initiative, Native American Mining and Energy Sovereignty Initiative, that we formed in partnership with the Colorado School of Mines, our National Tribal Energy Association, another hat that I wear. I'm the CEO and the chairman of the board. That represents the four largest energy producing tribes in the country: the Navajo, the Southern Ute, the Crow, and the three affiliated tribes. Collectively, those four tribes produce well over 90% of the energy produced in Indian country. And so we've formed these partnerships and actually working on another right now. We can't say who, but it's a top 50 R1 university, uh, um, which is really focused on research. And so the third aspect is, again, even if we didn't have land, even if we didn't have resources, the third and probably the most important is getting in on the research and development of these critical minerals. Not only the technology to find them, to process them, to process the tailings, but it's also the technology to use them, whether it's carbon capture, gasification, whatever that technology is. The opportunity is to partner with our research partners, including the national labs, and then the private sector, to be able to share in the IP. And so if were able to do each of those independently, I think we would be in good shape. But I think the opportunity is to be able to do each of those three things simultaneously or within a process, a phased approach. I think that's going to be the key moving forward. That's the opportunity, not just for us, but for the U.S. to secure our energy and our mineral security.
Thank you, Daniel. Really nice background set up there. I wanted to also have Mike and Brian both introduce themselves as well before I get into further questions. Mike, would you like to start?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks very much, and a real pleasure and honor to be here with everyone. So Michael McPhie, as Bashmeg introduced earlier, I've spent about 30 years in the mining business, both in Canada and the US, and worked a bit in South and Central America as well, and mostly in major project development, with a lot of that really being at the front end of working and building partnerships with communities, and in many cases Indigenous communities. And so the work that's what I do now and Regeneration is a company that recovers minerals from mine waste, and then restores landscapes as part of and ecosystems as part of our work. I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but that's really that focus of positive economic development in partnership with communities, and that's where I spend a good part of my time. So, and I'm based in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada.
Brian?
Sure. So my background, other than government, I got on tribal council in 2019, but it was a long journey to there. I spent many years in the United States Marine Corps and traveled the world 7 different times, deployed 7 times to foreign countries, and then got out and went to college, got 3 degrees. One of them was in international relations. And graduating college, I came back home and got a job with the largest gold producer in the world, which is a Canadian company, Barrick, who mines extensively in Nevada, and they do have an operating site, or did, in Montana. But the majority of their operating sites, other than their global arm, I mean, they had a South American region, they had an African region, and then they had a North American region, and that's the one I worked with. So there was a lot of mines in what's called the Carlin Trend, which is somebody mentioned the northern part of Nevada, which is all mining, right? I mean, so if Nevada was its own country, it'd be the 4th largest producer in the world as far as minerals. So the tribes that are from Nevada are very familiar with mining. The mining versus the tribes have been an issue for, forever. Since encroachment onto Indigenous lands back in the late or early 1800s, and then obviously the Mining Act, battle-born state because of the Civil War, and thus, and so it was passage through traditional Aboriginal lands, and then extraction of minerals to fund the Civil War. But the tribes, the treaty that was signed does not speak about compensation for extraction of minerals. And so a very famous permitting battle broke out in the year 2000 on the largest gold ore deposit in the lower 48, and that was at Cortez Hills. And it was with originally a mine called Placer Dome. It was a Canadian company. So that was a very, very contentious battle, and with the Western Shoshone tribes and the Western Shoshone Defense Project, which ultimately ended in a permit in 2008. But as a result of that, the 2 people, and they were called the Dan sisters, Mary and Carrie Dan, formed the resistance or the fight against not only the mining industry, but the BLM. And it landed them in the United Nations. And in 2006, they made many trips back there to testify. And a document, which I think everybody's familiar with, UNDRIP, the UN Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights, was born out of that. So even though the Dans lost that battle, they did win that war where that document was produced. Every country signing on but 4, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the United States. And Canada did later on sign in 2016. They're now a signature to UNDRIP, which basically, one of the main things is that Native Americans or Indigenous people have rights to the land, even though they don't own title to the land, such is the case in North America with Native Americans and with the case of the First Nations in Canada. So Canada honors this. And so I was mining with Barrick. They formed a Native American Affairs program within the company in the lower 48, started working with the Western Shoshone tribes at the time. And there's 7 of them down there. And they got real close to a benefit sharing agreement. But they tried to do 7 tribes all at once, and they're all sovereign nations. And the thought was, and it's what happened, is that if one tribe didn't sign, then there wouldn't be a BSA. And so that fell apart because one tribe did not sign on. So that's how I become associated with the mining industry. I was in external affairs, governmental affairs, Native American affairs with Barrick, North America, and started working with tribes. Later on, left the company in 19 as they had a change of management. If you're mining, I'm sure Michael knows Mark Bristow, South African dude. Me and him, we just didn't get along, and I left the company when he came on. So that kind of sets the foundation of where I came in, as far as working with the tribal governments and pursuing tribal rights in Aboriginal territories, historic Aboriginal territories. And we got there. I mean, we did sign a historic agreement with Integra Mining. And later on, I mean, I'm sure that there'll be questions on that, and I'll do the best to answer.
Sounds good. Daniel, actually, can you share a bit more on your background? I think we started recording a little bit later than when you started talking, so would love to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks again, Batchmake, for inviting me to speak. My name is Daniel Cardenas. I'm a member of the Pit River tribe, which is a small tribe in the northeastern part of California. I served on my tribal council, first elected when I was 18 in 1992, which is way over 30 years ago, and served in that capacity for many years. I live in Wyoming on the Wind River Indian Reservation, which is the home of my wife and my 7 Northern Arapaho children. So among many hats, as I mentioned, we co-founded the Native American Mining and Energy Sovereignty Initiative, the NAMES initiative at the Colorado School of Mines, in partnership with the Colorado School of Mines and the Payne Institute. And so that's in its 2nd year. I said I head the National Tribal Energy Association, representing the 4 largest energy producing tribes in the nation. And I've spent most of my career as a tribal leader, representing my tribe in and around water and natural resources, and gaming. In California, there's over 100 tribes within the state of California, and so that's really my background in terms of the hats that I wear. Oh, one last thing, I also sit on the National Petroleum Council. I was appointed by the last Secretary of Energy, representing the interests of those 4 tribes, but Indian country in general, on that Petroleum Council in and around oil and natural gas. And so, National Petroleum Council represents the 200 largest oil and gas companies and their CEOs. And so, and we'll be meeting at the beginning of December. We just formed a new committee, which hadn't existed before, in and around federal permitting. And so I sit on that committee, and so we're coming up with a new interim report that should be released around December 3rd or 4th, which highlights, our National Petroleum Council's opinions in regards to trying to streamline permitting primarily around oil and gas, but it still applies to what we're talking about today in regards to mining. So that's me.
Okay, wonderful. So at Nomadic Venture Partners, we know the society is moving towards a minerals and metals dependent world. But we know that supply is nowhere near where we're seeing demand in terms of projections, and demand is continuously increasing with AI data centers, more national security products that require critical minerals, energy transition, as well as just making sure that people have access to reliable electricity around the world. The data shows that also 70% of those minerals are on or around tribal lands around the world, including the United States. And we also have an opportunity to remine some of the old mine waste that also is around Indigenous lands around the world. So that kind of sets the foundation of this conversation and why we're having it in the first place. So Michael, going back to you, you've said that major projects move at the speed of trust, which was a principle reflected in Falkirk's work across British Columbia, helping projects move forward through collaboration with First Nations and regulators. How can that same approach guide the next generation of mineral discovery and reclamation projects that aim to restore both, ecological ecosystems as well as relationships with Indigenous tribes.
Right. Thanks for the question. Well, yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it, about trust? Is the really, you can't legislate trust. It isn't something that is given without time and experience. And the reality is, and I would expect most people on this call, if not everyone, would agree that there's a lot of unfortunate precedent for Indigenous communities not to trust proponents and governments in many respects, not just here in Canada, the US, but around the world. And so part of the exercise that we found at Regeneration and other companies that I work with is you really need to slow down a little bit and take time to understand who it is you're talking to, and the experience, the history, the culture, the lived story that people, and Brian, some of your comments, and Daniel, like the reality is that industry hasn't always acted in the interests of those communities, and there's a certain amount of humility, I think, that's important to bring to the table, and actually take the time to understand another person, another community's story. Because I've been involved in regeneration. One of the things that we're doing is we're recovering minerals from waste. Well, and we talked, I think in the introduction, was about how so much of that is close to communities. Well, those communities didn't necessarily want that waste there. So the opportunity to go back and recover and clean up is a wonderful thing. And that goes part to creating trust. But I mean, the reality is that things have changed. So Brian was referencing UNDRIP, and free, a lot of acronyms in this space, free, prior, and informed consent. One of the things when we're working in the business and with proponents is really helping executive teams and management and others. And I mean, the lawyers will say it, but the reality is the fundamental way in which projects are assessed and advanced with these commitments, whether legislatively or by the standard guidelines of industry associations or company policies themselves. If you're recognizing Indigenous perspective and rights going into a conversation, that infuse on it a certain level of responsibility to those companies and the people operating. In order to get somebody to the statement of actually having trust, then that is built up over time. And one of the conflicts we see is that industry and business moves really quick. I mean, we're seeing it happen right now with permitting being, pushed forward, and everything's moving a lot faster. But the foundational elements of actually building a relationship maybe hasn't been there for whatever reason, and that's where a bit of the conflict comes in. And what we've tried to do, and I'll just sort of finish on this, is that there's some amazing partnerships. And in the book that we wrote, Weaving Two Worlds, we give some case studies of partnerships and things that have come together. The interesting thing about them is a lot of them are pretty recent, and there's a lot happening in this space of examples where Indigenous community in Canada, Western Canada, there's Indigenous communities that are actually investing in companies themselves, taking equity, sitting on boards, being a part of the project. And one of the key things, I think, and Brian or Daniel, tell me if I'm right here or not, but it's being at the table and part of the decision making, not having somebody design a project in a room and then come and tell them what's going to happen. It's about taking the time to listen to those stories, develop it, and the concepts and ideas together, taking into account concerns, and then building something hopefully that has broad basis of support to be able to move forward. So there's a lot of room here, and there's some really good examples in recent time.
Speaking at being at the same table, Brian, the Shoshone-Paiute tribes of the Duck Valley Reservation and Integra Resources Corporation recently made a lot of headlines with signing a historic partnership agreement for a proposed gold and silver mining project in southwestern Idaho. Can you share more about that partnership, when it started, what made it work, and what was going behind the scenes within the tribe?
Sure. I mean, it's a very interesting story, and it's a result of the stars all aligning at the same time. They actually came to the tribes in 2020, and I had just gotten on council. I had left the mining industry, and so I was familiar with the permitting process. I was part of the permitting team for the mine called Cortez Hills, and I had been at 3 operating sites in Nevada, 3 of the larger ones: Cortez itself, Gold Strike, and then a tier 2 mine called Ruby Hill. And that was an old homestake mine that Barrick purchased from Placer Dome later on. So I had environmental background, and then went to the Shared Business Center as external affairs, dealing with Native American tribes. So I was able to talk the same language as them, and they came to us wanting to do the right thing, right? They didn't want to fall into what happened at Cortez Hills, which turned into a 5-year nightmare, no, 8-year nightmare, basically. Cost them hundreds of millions of dollars just to get it permitted. Actually, Placer Dome never did permit it. They actually sold it to Barrick because they approached it, I believe, in a totally a wrong way, and spent all their capital trying to get it permitted. They never did. They never could get it permitted. Barrick came in later on and permitted it. So it's at the end of the day, it's the social license to operate and how you're perceived in the Indigenous community, and so it's going to be a business decision on how you approach tribes. So Integra came in, and they're a Canadian company, and they're used to working in the Canadian realm. And they said they wanted to do it the right way, and they started meeting with the tribes. They took all of our elders to the site. Everything that they did, we had tribal participation in. And then before we signed any agreements, probably a year ago, we actually accompanied them up to Tahltan Nation. And Michael had mentioned, Western Canada, and the way the Golden Triangle is dealing with the Tahltan Nation, a couple other nations up there. It's totally a different world. As a Native American in the largest mining state there is in the United States, and seeing how mining companies have interacted with tribes, and then to go up to Canada and see this phenomenon of these companies giving the First Nations a piece of what they're doing. And it's a game changer. I mean, they actually they fundamentally changed the lives of these tribes through financial benefit sharing agreements. And it's like night and day from First Nations and mining to Native American tribes and mining. So they took us up there. We had to actually fly 4 hours by helicopter, 2 hours to a place called Eskay Creek, fueled up, and then 2 hours again by helicopter further north. So these were remote sites, but the tribes, it's just amazing on what the First Nations people are doing with the industry. And so when we came back and we got into the agreement, it was trying to implement Canadian style social responsibility down here in the lower 48. And it upset a lot of mining companies because that was the first toe in. I'm not saying they were threatened, but they were told, don't do this. Don't bring that shit down here. And we did. And I'm actually presenting at the Idaho Mining Association next Monday on the exact same thing. I presented it down here in the lower 48 in Elko, Nevada. I mean, these are all major mining areas, and it's refreshing to see mining industry see how it's a possibility to do something other than go to war with a tribe while trying to get a permit. I mean, they're going to spend just as much capital on fighting than they are if they just sit down, work out with the tribes, and allow the tribes to get into a financial benefit sharing agreement, no matter how small it is, or how large, to make them feel that they're not just totally getting ripped off. And that's the attitude. I mean, up until just now, the tribes in Nevada are called what's called non-revenue tribes, where they have no economic development whatsoever. Yet they should be some of the richest tribes there are in the United States, just because the amount of minerals there are in the state of Nevada. It's one big pit. There's an awful lot of mining going on in Nevada. You can't drive in any town in Nevada without passing a truck with a flag on it. So,
Ryan, I want to double click on the financial benefit sharing. Is there a certain type of instrument? Maybe Michael, you can chime in as well, given what you're seeing out there. Is it, equity sharing, profit sharing? What sort of mechanisms seem to be working these days?
well, for us, and then there's a bunch of them in Canada, and I'll let Michael speak to those. But for ours, it's going to be equity in the mine, part owner. It's also going to be a financial benefit sharing piece. So they're still in the phase of feasibility, not sure on what the all-in sustaining cost is going to be per ounce, and how many ounces are actually there. They have an estimate. I mean, it's going to be like maybe a tier 2 mine, maybe tier 1 mine, probably 200,000 ounces on an annual basis. So the actual number of benefit, the actual dollar amount, is unknown right now, but it'll be a percent. I mean, it's not going to be, 50, 20, 30%. It's going to be single digit percent wise. But also the big thing is the equity, and then allowing us to reinvest into additional stock. And then also what's also written into the agreement is, business opportunities for the tribe. The first thing we're going to do is getting into the busing industry, because they have to bus their workforce. And that was one of the major businesses we saw that the Tahltan Nation got into, and that was, transporting workers up to the site. And it's a very lucrative business. It's something that they have to have, because, all mine sites are pretty much remote. And in Nevada, I think the closest mine is 80 miles from a town, or 50, 60 miles. I mean, so it's a bus ride, period. And so that's a very good business. Up front, they want to purchase buses and let us get a shop, manage it. And, so we can be self-sustaining and get economic development, that kind of thing. None of this shit is a handout, right? I mean, this is stuff that, there's a lot of work that's been put into it. There's a lot of buying that has to take place. It's hard work for everybody, but it's rewarding all the way around. It's you belonging to something other than depending on the United States government for BIA dollars and contract dollars. I mean, this is work.
I would just maybe add quickly to what Brian's said, which I totally agree with, is there's really three things that we've seen in recent time, and some of it's been around a while, but significantly more in recent days. One is, my major resource projects spend a lot of money on goods and services, right? So the main drivers of costs for mines in particular is people and energy. Those are the two things. And then all the stuff, all the supplies, and there's a huge ecosystem of opportunity that is involved in that. And the really progressive companies, many of companies like Newmont and others, they have built procurement systems that support Indigenous participation in supply companies. And that the beauty of that is it's not always linked just to one mine. It can spread over an entire region, and you could be, so you're not dependent, because one of the things you get worried about is, well, if that mine doesn't work out or whatever, you left. By being involved in the supply side, you get a chance to be a part of the whole ecosystem of mining more generally. And in a place like Nevada, there's lots of opportunity, and there's some real amazing. Tahltan and others are real examples of that. Equity ownership, I think, is even symbolically is super important. You're now an owner, right? You're a shareholder of a company, and you're part of the decision making. You have ability to vote. You have all those sort of things. It changes the conversation and people's perspective, I think. And then the final one is around taxes. So in Canada, and I know this may not be the case in certain states, and tax policy is always can be a little polarizing. But one of the things that we've really advocated for on the industry side is if you're paying a mineral tax to a state and a tribe or an Indigenous community is proximal to it, as part of it or whatever, why aren't they getting a share of that tax? Why is it going to the capital somewhere and then getting fed back in some inefficient loop? Why not target? So in British Columbia, there's a mineral tax called the BC mineral tax. And in many cases, as part of the negotiation of the project going forward, a portion of that tax goes directly to the community. So, and from a proponent side, it's good because it's one tax, right? Now the government's splitting it and the people that are most directly affected benefit from it. So that tends to generate a lot of support, and it's been, I think, a good policy.
Thank you.
And I'll add to that tax comment. You know, it's very recognizable in Nevada because there's 28 tribes in Nevada, but the tax that happens in the industry stops at the reservation line because it's a state tax, right? So none of the Indigenous tribes, all 28 of them, get no benefit from that tax. And just recently in Nevada, I mean, it was 2 sessions ago, legislative session, they had a bill called AB 495, which leveled another $160 million on the mining industry. I testified in opposition because the tribes were not involved. They didn't bring the tribes to the plate. You know, we would have wished that the state had included some of the tribes in there. Like I said, we're non-revenue and we're the poorest communities there are in the state of Nevada. You know, at the end of the day, whether it's through medical, healthcare, ambulatory, police, we have all these social injustices that happen. They're going to pay one way or another. I mean, we end up either in an emergency room or something, or on the welfare. We just felt that the tribe should have been involved in that AB 495. And this next session, we are going back to the state of Nevada. We have one legislative bill that we can bring forward, and this year we're going to bring forward an Indigenous cut of the mining taxes is in existence.
Thank you, Daniel. And the next question, I'm going to flip it over to you. Obviously, not every tribe has a Brian in their corner who has extensive mining industry and technical and government policy experience. What is the NAMES initiative with the Payne Institute doing to help build up that technical capacity for tribes as they navigate more, mining activity potentially coming into their land?
So that's the main idea, right? There's 574 tribes. Even if 10% have capacity or sophisticated, have all the money in the world, have the staff, that means 500 tribes don't. And so that's the enormity of the issue here, and to me, but the opportunity. And so the main thing that we're trying to do at the School of Mines, our NAMES initiative, is to develop the next generation of geology and mining and energy professionals to the PhD and postgraduate level. That's really what we're trying to do. I mean, they exist, they're out there, far and few between, but it's not enough. Especially, like I said, with the bottom line issue of what I mentioned earlier, is that if we believe that those minerals lie in Indian country, for right now, our states, our federal government are not paying attention. Either they know and don't want to pay attention, or they know or don't know. They're focusing on Greenland and the Congo and Australia, everywhere but the United States. And I think that's a detriment to us. I think bringing the tribes together, so NAMES, one of the things besides trying to develop the next generation of students, and we've raised almost $2 million primarily from the mining industry, Rio Tinto, our BHP, Resolution Copper, and some others have donated to do that. And we've, over the last 2 years, we've named approximately 12 last year, I believe, and then one our first year. So we've already got some scholarships going, and as we refine that and so that we can be more impactful, you'll see more of that. But one of the things that the NAMES is able to do is to convene tribes, academia, and the industry. And that's what we've done over the last 2 years at our name symposium. The first 2 years were held at Durango, Colorado, on the home of the Southern Ute Indian Reservation. Next year, we're planning to be at the Laguna Pueblo, the site of the at one time the largest open pit uranium mine in the U.S. And so it's convening and getting folks together to have a dialogue. The whole purpose to the names initiative, and if it ends that way, that's great. If not, if it moves in a different direction, that's great as well. But one of my goals when we created this was to create a policy center. No other one exists in the U.S. that would be specifically controlled by tribes and moved by tribes to create energy and mineral policy. It doesn't exist. We're taking policy from other institutions, from the feds, everybody else except us. We're not developing a strategy and a sort of a combined effort at the federal level to be able to lobby and do those things. So to me, that's what we plan to do with names. It's still relatively new, but we think, like I said, in the long term, we really focus on information, and that to me, like I said, from on an FPIC, the informed consent, the informed part to me is the most important. We can be at the table. Doesn't matter if we don't have the information or the right information to make an informed decision. We're going to be making a wrong decision, or as right as can be for that time. And so that's the conundrum that everybody's in, right? Including our industry partners, is that information is king, and those that have the most information can make the best decision, but not always, right? So, I just want to speak to the previous question a little bit. Is that I was just in Cushing, Oklahoma, last week as invited by and a guest of Enbridge, which is a Canadian company, and in the oil and gas industry, Enbridge is the gold standard for community engagement. But they've even made missteps in the U.S. Because the problem is the First Nation and the tribes, although similar, aren't the same. Even if they're a percentage or 2 point difference, the process in Canada shouldn't be replicating the United States. We should be developing our own process rather than copy theirs and bringing it down. And so, like I said, one size doesn't fit all. The old adage, if you know one tribe, you know one tribe. There's 573 other tribes that you have to get to know. And so I think that I think the example that Brian mentioned, I think that's great. I think that's really a tribe, an example of a tribe moving forward in a self-determined way to make decisions for themselves and making a deal that benefits them. And I think that's really good. And as a model, what I want for tribes is for tribes to be in that eventually. It may never happen, but that's why we're trying to train those next generation of professionals, because we want tribes to be in the seat of that integrated resources. We want the tribes to be developing projects, raising capital, buying equity into projects, being an equal partner, on a dollar basis with companies. And I think we've still got a long ways to go. I mean, the opportunity is huge, but I'm very optimistic. And so initiatives like the Names Initiative, I think, are just one piece of the puzzle that we need. Like I said, it's not gonna be. It's not. Some tribes aren't gonna sort of be attracted to what we're talking about, because what we're talking about is accountability and transparency, and especially with our voters, with our people. As a tribal politician, that's one of the hardest things for a lot of people. Not everybody, but a lot of folks. We tribal leaders get dinged for not being transparent and being open and honest with our members. And so I think that we've got to change the model, change how business is done, I look at our relationship with the federal government as being in a marriage where we can't get divorced. And so I always say, when life serves you lemons, make lemonade. And so even though our relationship has been terrible, to be in a positive way, it's really terrible. But we're kind of stuck with each other if the model that we have existing today is going to continue. And so we've got to do the best to try to work with them. And that's why I really focus on relationships with the national labs, with the Department of Energy, because they've taken the lead, right, for critical minerals and rare earths. And so working with them, and hand in hand to be able to get things done for an in-country. Anyways, hopefully I answered the question.
Thank you, Daniel. Michael, I think, what Regeneration is doing is really innovative and interesting, to me at least. I know the Department of Interior has an initiative to remine old mining waste. There's also the Good Samaritan legislation that's been making its way through. I think we're seeing this great momentum to actually take care of old mine waste, as well as help rebuild trust with Indigenous lives around the world. So how do you see policy changing and evolving as you ramp up your work with Regeneration? And how can innovation also support your work as we're thinking about restoration of land?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And well, first off, just a shout out to the Colorado School of Mines who did some analysis on the state of play in this area. And I think one of the top lines out of that was that, there's a significant amount of the critical minerals that we need just sitting on the ground today in ways. It's not an easy business in the sense that it does require innovation, technological innovation, the ability, because you're dealing with a product that wasn't high enough grade to be considered ore at the time. So to recover the metals and minerals that are contained within it, you need an approach that's going to work. Of course, when you have commodity prices the way we do today with copper and gold and things like that doing really well in the demand, but so it's making projects that might otherwise not been economic really attractive today. But the interesting thing, what's held it back a lot has been the risk around liability, whether under CERCLA or others, where if you were a new entrant into the conversation and you put a spade in the ground, you get worried that you're going to inherit those past liabilities that might have been created by someone else. And that risk profile has really, I think, in many respects, has prevented the innovation that in many cases from happening. And so we have this resource sitting there waiting. It might be a real concern to a local community because of water pollution or whatever it might be, but there's been this barrier to action that has, and so a lot of them have been turned into Superfund sites or whatever it might be. But when business faces those kind of risks, it's really hard to act, and then so communities are left with the legacy. The cost is very high to the public taxpayer, and the resources left there. So that's kind of like a state of play we've seen for quite a long time. So Regeneration was established, and we have Rio Tinto as an investor. We also have downstream users like Apple and a Canadian jewelry company called Majuri that does some innovative sustainability and restoration kind of jewelry lines. And then we have big heavy equipment groups like Caterpillar involved and others. And we're trying to tackle this big issue of mine waste and minerals recovery economically and then restore landscapes. The key policy innovation in the last days of the previous administration was around the Good Samaritan legislation, which works on federal lands and administered under the EPA, which allows the possible restoration recovery of those sites and metals recovery with protection against liability. And I think the more policy innovation around that, which we're front and center on advocating for and working with, I think we can really create some opportunity for local economic development and addressing some of these major issues have been with us for a very, very long time.
Thank you, Michael. We're really excited about that legislation too. We've seen a number of interesting innovations tackling acid mine drainage, really taking advantage of old mine waste to create something of value to society, including sustainable cement material, critical minerals, and so on. So we look forward to continued collaboration with the industry on that front. Ryan, you mentioned a lot about financial opportunities, but I want to double click on uh, what other partnerships exist and what, the tribe is advocating for. Are there certain decision-making roles that, your tribe has placed, leaders within the project? And how has that also impacted some of the permitting processes and ensuring the mining companies being accountable in terms of environmental and cultural standards? Brian, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Integra brought us in before they entered permitting, and they, like I said, they took our elders out to the site. We accompanied their archaeological team out there for looking for any Native American sites whatsoever. We did find some significant ceremonial pipes that they used in ceremony on the ground, and we were able to move those to another location. But we also got to object to the mine plan. When they first started the mine plan, they brought the tribal members in, and if something didn't sit well with the tribe, they altered it. Then this is when, but prior to them spending a bunch of capital and putting something in place already, right? So the smart thing is they brought us in at the very front, and we were able to say, this is a significant site. This is where people would go to pray. Back in the prehistoric time, pre-European contact. So they allowed the tribes to not only be a partner, but a partner in actually establishing where it could. The one benefit about that site is that is actual a historic site. You guys are mentioning the recovery of old heap dumps or maybe some leach pads. This is a site that was in care and maintenance for a long time. I think it last mined in the 90s. So it was an already disturbed site, and so there's a footprint, but there's also easy targets of opportunity where you don't have to move dirt twice, right? There's dumps there already that can be mined with new technology, where they're gonna the grade is there where before it didn't make grade. So it allowed the project to allowed it to pull a pit because the economics were there. And the other thing I'll mention, with the tribes and with the Department of Interior, is that early on, when we did go to Canada, the Department of Interior was so interested that the Assistant Secretary of the Interior accompanied us, to Canada with the Tahltan Nation. Dr. Scott Feldman. He's an individual. Obviously, he doesn't work anymore for the Interior because he's of the last administration, but he's still there lobbying and doing some work. And there had been discussions about this, for a very long time. Just that no one knew how to implement it. Because once you do this, once you put your toe in, there's no coming back. And that was the fear of a lot of the bigger mining companies, especially in Nevada, that once this happened, that there's no going back. That the tribes are going to, be able to claim some of the things that are rightfully theirs, as far as the sharing of some of the benefits of having minerals extracted from traditional Aboriginal lands. So it's pretty complicated, but it seems to be coming out in the wash. We're getting calls almost every day about people inquiring about this. How can they do it? I don't know how many mining companies we're starting to partner with. Integra's stock doubled the day we announced our agreement, which is just a show that it, in fact, it is the way to do business.
That's wonderful to hear. I know we're kind of closing up on time, so maybe I'll summarize some of the observations I heard, and maybe you can add on as well. Each tribe is different. Number one, I think government capacity could be limited based on the tribes. So really finding ways to reduce some of the burden on tribal governments would be really helpful. Don't assume all tribes have same concerns about specific projects. I've been also hearing some of the timeline issues in terms of being misaligned, for a mining project versus how Indigenous people think about 7 generations ahead. Benefits come in many forms, including financial, but also, clean water, preserving traditional ways of life, culture, religious sites, etc. And then another piece I learned today was really just being considerate of historical trauma, particularly as mining companies are looking to develop partnerships with tribes around the US and Canada. So I want to flip my last question to everybody on the panel today. What does the future of Indigenous partnership look like when it comes to critical minerals? What do you wish this partnership could look like?
I can start. I think it has to be different, right? There's no excuse now. Before prior generations, when Bureau of Indian Affairs and Interior were responsible for signing the contracts, and a lot of these contracts, the tribes didn't even read or they just did them for rights of way and different things. That era is over. But it's up to us as tribes, as tribal leaders, to make sure that it's over, because, like I said, various administrations move back and forth in terms of trying to go back to different eras, right? I mean, there's a movement for some that want to go back to the Gilded Age, and that's when a lot of the worst of things happened to the tribes during that time. And so, but to me, the being able to mine sustainably, I think, is really important. In that, the last industrial revolution was really around oil, and again, if we were in oil, we were primarily royalty owners. That's how we participated. Now, the opportunity for this new mining era, the mine of the future, I think is for us to be all the above, right? If we choose to be just royalty owners, that's great. But if we want to be equity owners, we want to be project sponsors, we want to have procurement roles, join in on the IP, the logistics, the processing. I mean, I think that's a fair game, and so I think that's really, to me, what the opportunity is that it can't be like it's been done in the past, because now it's our responsibility as leaders to be able to make sure that it doesn't happen.
Michael?
Yeah, thanks. Look, I'm super optimistic. There's this isn't theoretical anymore. I think whether it's what Daniel's saying or Brian's example with Integra, there is both a business opportunity, a business imperative to figure this out. And I think there's some really, really good examples that are current, they're real, they're not just sort of unicorns out there. They're like happening every day with progressive companies figuring out. And at the end of the day, this is a human relationship thing that is built on companies not acting in their own self-interest, in the sense that, look, if I figure this out, I mean, not every stock is going to double. I think that may not happen, but in terms of being able to advance a project with support and have long-term socioeconomic stability and a good partner, companies that are at the front of this, they're doing really, really well. And I think it should be an inspiration to everybody in the business.
Amazing. Brian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's not only just mineral extraction, it's just natural resources, whether it was trees or salmon or loss of salmon because of hydroelectricity as progression. I'm I have something in common with Daniel, is that both of our tribes lost salmon, as a progression. Whether you're in Bernie Falls, Hat Creek, Alturas, or whatever band you're from in the Pitt River, they suffered for the same as us. Duck Valley were a salmon people too, on the Duck Valley Reservation, because the Waukee River that runs through us is offshoot of the Snake. And once they dammed it up, we lost salmon. We were a salmon people. The Pitt River's flag is actually 3 salmon connected. So, I mean, it's not just minerals, it's natural resources. And by the way, Daniel, my brother-in-law was the chairman of out of Big Bend for a long time, and Bernie. Pit River guy. So
Amazing. Well, thank you all for your time. I think, to close it up from Nomadic Venture Partners, and we're really investing in the technologies and innovation that can create the transparency, sustainability, reduce the environmental concerns so that tribes can benefit from the economic, financial benefits without foregoing other natural resources along the way. So I hope you all learned something new today, and we definitely plan to continue this conversation with new speakers and continue to focus on this topic as we host more events throughout the year. So please do keep that in mind. I'll also share with the attendees some of the books that I would recommend on this topic and additional reports as well if you'd like to continue learning. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
thank you.
All right, have a good day. Thanks, everyone.